try to be that group that can help be there for the players as a three, because I think you mentioned earlier, you want to have different characters in the changing room. You want to have different personalities. You don't want the same kind of people, because you're not going to be able to move forward. If you've got 10 people and they all agree the same things, you're going to get to a point in time where actually you're going to become unstuck. You need that one person to actually be like, nah, I don't agree with that. Or actually, we should try this. And I think that's why the Huddle works, is we're all quite different as human beings. And I think you need 3 different people in there, because some players will naturally gravitate towards me and my personality, but equally some might go to the other 2, and that's absolutely fine.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Reflective Coach podcast with Coach Luca. In this week's episode, I'm delighted to welcome Worcester City captain and female footballer Jessica Fassnidge. It is great to have had Jess on the podcast because she offers so much in terms of the insights of both being a player as well as a coach herself. She has a number of great roles whereby she's an exercise physiologist, she's a player and captain as well, she's an academy manager at Science for Sport and a walk-in football coach. Her previous experiences led to her being interim football head coach at Worcester City, which led to a good experience but also allowed her to gain that understanding then of that perspective and that different dimension of transitioning from player to head coach, and how that perspective from the players group may see you in a different light. Plus, by being in that position, even though she was for a short period of time, you have to make critical decisions. Now, these critical decisions come down to player selection, rotation, game, tactical, technical, that different rotation, dealing with player efforts and those insights of players, the player boundaries that there may be, players coming to you with requests, players that may be unhappy, and how you deal with this as an interim manager is certainly an interesting position, because you're not there for a long period of time and you're not on a permanent basis. So interim leaves you in a very fickle position as such. So it was an interesting perspective of what Jess speaks about. But Jess has a much wide experience, which then she's able to combine that between understanding that as a player, understanding what she does as a captain, and taking all these characteristics into that interim head coach role. Now, the purpose of this episode and the real highlight is Jess's playing time. We talk about her being a captain, talk about her being a leader, what she expects from her teammates, expects from her team, how she leads her team on and off the pitch, how she's supportive of them, how she has those relationships, those non-negotiables, the expectations, the environment that she creates, being the extension to the management team, and really understanding the decisions that they have to make then to relay that into the playing team, and therefore creating that understanding of why. And that understanding of why creates a real good environment which allows the players to have that wider perspective, that wider understanding, whereby the issues are mitigated and they're able to play with such synergy. Now, it is great to talk to her, Jess, because she speaks about so many different topics. So we spoke about the topic of energy and what the expectations of the player are, the energy in the dressing room, energy on and off the pitch, energy within those teammates, and the energy that she maintains and has whilst maintaining being a player, being a coach, and combining everything that she does by working as well as playing. We talked about non-negotiables and principles, and this interlinks really nice with a previous guest that we've had on the podcast. Checking the ego. Now, this ego check from the teammates, the players around you, the opposition that you may be going into, how you may want to progress the game, how you want to progress your team, comes back down to those individual personalities. And those individual personalities each have ego, and whilst they all have ego, it's sometimes about managing them and when best to check that ego, not to bring it into play. As we said before, it can be detrimental and sometimes it can be useful. So whilst we have that and we unpack that, we must understand that checking ego at the door and know when to utilise it in the best position for yourself and the team can have a real positive effect on how you manage it. Now, she talked about the Huddle, which is a real great insight in terms of how her team works and how they get together. And that Huddle is not a leadership team as such, but they push the narrative through. They understand what is needed and wanted. They're able to push through the stories, the insights, the expectations, any wants of the players. And it's able to support the extension as such by not essentially being a leadership team, but by working in cohesion with the management and allowing players to step up or be part of an insight group where they can really connect and develop something close. And as Jess said, and interlinks there, it is about something bigger, that bigger picture, that connection. So as a player, it's not about bringing problems or creating problems, it's about creating solutions. And how can you create solutions as a player? How can you bring it to the team? How can you connect this? How can you support the coaching team? Sometimes you're on a pitch and you can see a different perspective from the coach, the manager, and therefore you have to create that solution at the times when there might be problems. Now, we have to have split-second thinking because there's so much happening on the pitch. We're being pressed, opposition are tightening space, we're under pressure of losing possession, we don't have many players around us, and we can only react at times to what's in front of us. Now, we can plan as much as possible to have these solutions, but sometimes we're going to be faced with them without having to be able to plan for them, or without having a plan that we can instill. So by creating solutions as a player whereby, right, I know they're tightening up on space, and therefore what is the solution if they're going to keep doing this time and time again? Well, it's going to be, maybe could I shift on to the other side, and therefore I've got a solution because they're pressing me over the space, over the speed, whereby then I'm lacking that space. So therefore you create a problem for the other team. So then they have to react and create a solution. So do they shuffle their team and then put their better players out on the left hand side to deal with you, or swap sides so they're equipped to deal with that? And then comes in the technical and tactical side of the game, which is really interesting, how you react, how you plan, how you create those solutions. But creating solutions as a player, there is so much within that, and we could spend another episode talking just about that. And that was just a little bit of an example about how a solution could be made on your team and create a problem for the others. Now, if you're going to be that opposing manager, the opposition, then as you're presented with that problem, and this is a good scenario for you to reflect upon, how could you create that solution for your team? How could you look at that? How could you review it? And there comes up the step up of being a manager, being a tactician, being someone who can understand the players and be able to make that change and be adaptable. Now, I love what Jess says here. Sweat the details, sweat the small things. This is brilliant, and I'm not going to open too much about this because you can really hear it around minute 45 to minute 48 where she talks about this and leads into the context that allows her to really get into what she means by sweat the details. Now, we look at, the micromanagement that we can have over the endless list of things that we can manage ourselves, the solutions that we create, how we can take this in. But by sweating the small things, we're really going to have those consistencies, those non-negotiables. We're going to live up to expectations, or that we should be, and how we're able to really take things in our stride, challenge and overcome them to mitigate the outcomes. Now, there is so much within this episode, and we also speak about the exposure that a player has whilst in the women's game right now, and how the game is growing. As ever, whenever I speak to a footballer or a female footballer on the Q&A series on the podcast, we always touch upon the women's game itself. It's great to speak to Jess, and I loved listening to her. I loved her insights, and this was such a great episode. I really appreciate her time on the podcast, and I had such a wonderful time. She is really going places and has some exciting projects coming this way as well. Check out Jess and what she does across her socials. It was wonderful to speak to her, and hope you enjoy this episode as much as I have. You can continue to update your journal weekly and continue on that reflective series. Now, this is the Reflective Coach podcast. You can find it on Spotify, YouTube, Podcast Addict and Anchor. You can also find it on TikTok, Twitter and LinkedIn. It's at TRC Podcast _ on Twitter. I'm Anthony _ Luca 96. It's the Reflective Coach podcast everywhere else. Drop a like, drop a follow, drop a comment, leave a subscribe. It is really appreciated. We're sponsored by Humble Gifts, and we look forward to bringing you a wealth and a wider range of episodes as we continue to go forward. Again, drop that subscribe because it is really appreciated, as well as that follow, and everything that you do is really helping the podcast. I hope you enjoy this episode, and don't forget to add to your journal. This is Coach Luca on the Reflective Coach podcast. This week's episode is Jessica Fassnidge, and there is so much within it. How's your day been?
Yeah, not bad. Busy, but not bad. Can't complain.
Sounds like a typical day in the world of sport, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Always hard after a bank holiday. You forget what day it is, don't you?
Absolutely. Well, I work in education, so I was in till 1 o'clock this afternoon, and then usually I go to uni, but I've got an exam on Thursday. And then my mate wanted to do some media recording for his dissertation, so I ended up doing that this afternoon, coming back and now jumping on this call, but it's got to be done.
Love it.
How does a typical week look for you then?
Yeah, it's very sporadic. I wouldn't say it's very typical. So at the moment, I've got I wear different hats. So my main role is I'm a part-time exercise physiologist. So it sounds fancier than what it is. It's not as glamorous as it seems. So essentially that role is working for University of Worcester. We've got the contract to then go out to all the fire stations within Hereford and Worcester. So everyone that needs a fitness test in the fire service, obviously they have to be to a set standard to be able to do their role. So essentially for Hereford and Worcester in particular, I work within that area. I basically administer all the fitness testing for those firefighters and people within those areas. So that's kind of one part of my role, I guess. And then I do one-to-ones, I do a bit of coaching as well. And yeah, my coaching's vast. It's between one-to-ones, kind of leans into a bit of S&C. And then I recently, at the end of last year, took on coaching Euro walk-in football, which is a lot different. I mean, walk-in football in itself is completely different to football, which is mad. So yeah, still kind of getting the grips with the rules compared to normal football, but it's a good challenge and I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, that's good. And I was going to say, because you, looking on your profile, you've got a lot going on and a mix of different roles, and obviously juggling that and making sure everything fits in a time frame across a week. But I think that just shows in sport, because as much as, you know, you've got that amazing role in terms of just doing the fire service alone on its own entity, you know, combining playing, training, then being the captain, you know, traveling to and from games, and then the walking football, you know, in terms of setting up the sessions. And there's so much that goes with each of those roles, and then combining them, you know, in a typical week, and then you look at a month, and then across a year, etc. It's quite a lot to sort of juggle, you know, in one go.
Absolutely, yeah. For me, I'm that kind of person that I love it though. When you're in sport and when you're in something you're really passionate about and you love, every week is different, and I quite like that your schedule can be, you know, 1 minute you're spending a day doing this, then the next day you're on something else. So it kind of keeps me like refreshed. It keeps me passionate because it keeps me fueled to be like, right, I've put in my time for this part of the job today. Now it's kind of switching hats, moving on to the next thing. So I think when you're doing things that you love and you enjoy, it makes it a lot easier.
Absolutely, and I was going to say, does the motivation fluctuate depending on one? But you sort of answered it there, and I've got a sort of similar background. I worked in sport development, and as you say, every day can be different. So, you know, I might have been on a training course, or I might be at a school, I might be out in the community, I might be on a funded sports session, for example. But I was there two years, 8 months, and that absolutely flew by. And I don't think I've had a period of time at an organisation where the time has flown as quickly as it did there. And I sort of look back and I'm like, oh, I work full time in one place in a school every day, and it's sort of killing me, because even going out helping my mate earlier in terms of his dissertation, I just like being out and doing something different, and that's what I miss, is just going around and working with so many different groups of people and being in those areas. And as much as it's hectic, early mornings, late nights, travelling and waiting in between sessions at times, it was sort of dynamic because, you know, as you said, you're going out and doing all those different things.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It's that different circle of people. You often think that you might have many roles and they might be completely different, but you'll be surprised in what skill sets can be transitioned from one to another. And I think having a different circle of people, it gives you different perspectives, it gives you different opinions, and some of it can translate across to other industries, some of it might be a little bit more difficult. But I think that is the main part, is having that vast network. It certainly helps.
And in terms of that, then obviously you are a player and captain yourself. Does that take up, you know, a big proportion of your focus, or is that sort of balanced across everything that you do?
Yeah, I think it probably takes on. I'm probably allowed to take on my schedule more than it should. But I think that's just because I'm at a club where I'm just very passionate about what we're doing. So at Worcester City, we're doing something different. We've had, you know, fantastic people come in, take over the club, and they're kind of wanting to move us in the right direction of where women's football should be. And when you're passionate about something and you can see other like-minded people that are involved and they've bought into it and you buy into it, it makes you want to give all your energy to it. So I've probably often been caught probably doing too much. But that's me falling on my own sword. That's not necessarily the club putting it on me. It's me just being passionate, loving what I do, living what we're doing as a club, getting out in the community, and really buying into like what are our goals and visions for the future. So from my perspective, yeah, look, as a captain and as a player, I probably am a little bit unbalanced when I compare to all the different segments in my life. But it's something I love, and I just really want the club to progress, and I kind of put as much effort into it just because it's something I love. You know, if it's not something you love, you probably won't put as much into it.
And I love that, and as you say, that it is dynamic in terms of what you're doing, because, you know, women's football is a very exciting time. It's growing, and there's obviously expansions and how the leagues restructure, and the growth of clubs and more players coming through, etc. So what you're trying to do for the club is not only good for the club, but it's good for women's football. It's good for what you're doing in terms of your own platform as well. And as you say, when you've got that sort of group of people and that energy, which is collectively, you do it because you're passionate about it. You don't do it because, you're the captain, you have to do it because of obligations, etc. And then you just naturally end up enjoying it, which is good. And, it ends up naturally giving you more of a buy-in and more respect without you going, I'm doing this and I look good because I'm doing it, for example.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things when you're seen as being in a captain role or a leadership role, it's not about you. It's actually, if anything, it's about everyone else. You're just in that position there to best serve and help those people around you. And I think one of the main things is, and I've learnt this over the years, I probably wasn't like this 10 years ago, but it's so heavily influenced on your leadership's not about essentially forcing your will on people. I think Phil Jackson used to talk about it all the time when he spoke about like Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan. And, I think people have talked about the way Kobe used to be at the start of his career compared to how he transitioned as a leader. But by the end, people respect him because he's a good player. But I think they had that trouble with his leadership skills. But I think it's because he was forcing his will, according to Phil Jackson, this is, forcing his will on others as opposed to mastering that art of actually letting go. And it's the complete opposite. And that's just something you have to remember is when you're in those positions, it isn't about you. It's not about, you've got an armband on, it looks great. It's actually, right, how do you then get the best out of everyone else? And of course it comes with challenges. Everything comes with challenges, doesn't it? That's part of the journey. But I think that's one thing you have to remember when you are put in a leadership position, regardless if it's football or not. And, it could be any industry.
And when you say about getting the best out of people, how do you get the best out of your team in terms of captain when you're going out to, play a game typically on a weekend?
Yeah, good question. Still figuring that out. No, it's tough. I think it's when you're in a team sport, it's knowing your people. It's knowing each individual as an individual. Everyone reacts differently. Everyone responds differently. Someone that you could give a rollicking to and it gets them going and fired up, you couldn't do that to someone else because they might need an arm around them. So I think for me, that's something I'm still learning as a captain, even though I'm a bit older in my career and a bit more experienced. I'm still finding that balance at the moment of, what do the players need? And of course, there's going to be times where, as a club, we have standards, as the coaching staff, as leaders, as players, we have standards we adhere to and we might fall short. That's football, obviously it happens. But then again, it's approaching it in the right possible way, because I think if you've built trust with players, you're more than likely going to get a better buy-in and a better response. But from my perspective, I think everything's dynamic. You have to take each game, each situation as a completely unique situation or game, like I said, as its own. I don't think you can look at it as, right, what we did last Sunday is something we could do this Sunday. It's, again, like I said, it's building that trust of players. I think that's the most important thing.
And I love that. And I love, that emphasis on trust, because unless you get that trust out, you're never really going to understand what their personality types are or how they're going to respond. Because, football can be quite a tough sport. It's about their personalities. And at times we say about masking those weaknesses and not showing them. And a lot of people don't want to show them and don't come across. So, but realistically, as a team and as a captain, as you say, when you're in those leadership positions, we have to understand the weaknesses more than the strengths at times, because we really have to get through to those. Or, Jodie might be playing this week, but she doesn't like the way the opposition player's talking at her, for example. So how can I go in and support her in that situation? Because she might be younger, she might be timid, and it's how we support them. Because, we might take young players through and it's great about that progression, but at the end of the day, if they're coming up against a situation that they don't like, that could, scar them and then really turn them off because they might still have that timid attitude, for example. But I think trust is absolutely key. And when it comes down to, say, like non-negotiables, and you touched upon it, those principles, what would you say your non-negotiables are in terms of a captain then and in a leader role?
For me, I think a non-negotiable in a captain role is you have to be hardworking. You have to have the work ethic, because it's quite easy for people to be in that position to have the armband and think, I might be a good player, or I might just be the captain. But I think if you don't work hard, you're absolutely not in the right role. So for me, I've always played in teams where I'm nowhere near the most talented player. The only reason I think I've forced my way into teams and I've been able to achieve things is I've just worked hard. Purely, not even just on the pitch, you just work hard at being the best version of yourself, working hard for your team. And I think if you're in a captain position and you can work hard, a lot more players have more respect for you, because they know, okay, that player's going to work hard. They're going to do everything they can to run through walls for me, for this team. So my non-negotiable as a captain and as leaders, I think you have to work hard. I think in terms of a non-negotiable as a captain specifically within football, I think you have to be someone that is going to be there for people, okay? And that's something I've really, really struggled with in the last couple of months, probably the last 12 months in particular. It's you don't want to spread yourself too thin, because at the end of the day, there's only one of you. You can't be burning with everyone's issues. But I think it's about, which I'm trying to find at the moment, is finding that balance of get players, work with players and trust each other. You need to be able to trust them. They need to be able to trust you. But just know that for them, your door is open for them, okay? And that if they really do need you, you are there. So that's not obviously willingly going out and looking to solve situations and solve problems, which I think I've been caught up in the past of doing. And that's just coming from a good place as a person. I see this person upset. I want to go and help naturally. But I think you have to care. You have to have that empathy, because without that, I think you're not going to understand people. So I think you have to work hard. I think you have to have empathy. And I think you've got to have that passion. You've got to have that passion to do what you love, regardless of being a captain or a player. I think if you don't have that passion, the other two things are probably going to fall a little bit short.
And that's, great to hear about in terms of how you have those non-negotiables, how you support the players, and just about you as a person in terms of how you might take that into a natural role away from football, or how you might take it into, that head coach role, for example, if it came about. And, when it comes down to it, say Worcester were going to release you at the end of the year and you had the multiple choices of clubs, would it be non-negotiable for you then to have to go, right, I have to be the captain in this team, or would that be something that you'd be happy to relinquish?
Oh no, absolutely not. For me, as a player, I've been in teams of fantastic captains, maybe not so good captains, but for me, it's the kind of thing where armband on or not, I'm still going to be me. It's not going to change me. If anything, it probably makes me simmer down a little bit. I think sometimes I can be caught up in the moment of things, but then occasionally you have to remember, right, I've got the armband on, so I have to be better. I have to do better for my team. But if, God forbid, I wasn't at Worcester City, which I can't ever envision, because the club is just something I absolutely love and believe in. But yeah, if that ever did happen, that's not something for me that, it's not like a non-negotiable to be a captain. I think at the end of the day, you've just got to be you as a human being, and I will always be me regardless if I've got that band on or not. And, I'm not the kind of person to make an assumption that we get to the end of the season, I'm naturally going to be captain next year. Of course, you want to be, because you've been in that position. For me as an individual, I've had that honour of doing it for the past 12 months, but you can't automatically assume going into a new season, you get new players, you might have new coaching staffs, new goals, new visions, but I don't think any player can have that assumption and naturally going to be given that armband again.
And again, describes your personality, in that essence, which is just shows how supportive you are and who you are truly as a person. And, it's how you drive that energy in terms of a certain area, as you said earlier. But sometimes, I've had a bit of a reflection on it this week myself in terms of looking at coaching next year. And I know I got a under-19s manager role in terms of what I do voluntarily for my grassroots club. But if I want to go back into like pro coaching as an academy coach, for example, I'm like, I've always been a lead coach and that's where I naturally see myself. But would I want to accept an assistant coach? How would that look for me? Would I want to put myself there? And I know speaking to some other people, they're like, absolutely not. If I'm a head coach, I'm a head coach and head coach only. And I'm like, well, you're not really exposing yourself. And it's the same for you as a captain, because you might have had 5 years being a captain and you've got to, go to the coaching meetings. And as you say, you're taking on the information from the players, you're being there for them, open door, etc. But at that time, you might go, do you know what? I'm actually happy to walk away from captain and just focus on being a player and just enjoying a bit less accountability, for example.
Absolutely. I think it's just checking your ego at the door, right? We all have egos. They all come out at different times. It's just how much do you want that to come out and affect things around you. And I think, no one in their right mind as a human being, because if you're put on a pedestal, naturally people don't want to come off that, because it's a nice feeling. You feel valued and all those kind of things. You get external validation from other people, other things. It makes you feel good. But it's a very short-term solution to what the issue might be. And I think Ryan Mason is a prime example of someone who I think he has checked his ego at the door every time. So obviously at the moment, he's currently, being the first team manager for Tottenham Hotspur, but he's fluctuated between being first team manager, where he's had to be the kind of step-in person. When the manager got sacked, I think it's Mourinho at the time. He's then, what from people from the outside perspective would deem as being relegated, because he's then been put back in the academy, and then he's worked his way back up, and then obviously again he's first team manager. But I think from listening to him on podcasts and how he is, you think he is a prime example of check your ego at the door. As soon as he went from being Tottenham Hotspur manager to the next day they got someone in, he then moved to the academy and he was no different. He was still the same person. He was still that Ryan Mason who absolutely loved the club, was passionate about it and wanted to move people forward, whether he was coaching Harry Kane and Son and some of the best players in the world, or maybe the next generation and the academy players. And I think if we can all be a little bit like Ryan Mason, I think that's massive with development. It's easy to get caught up and be like, yeah, I've been a head coach for 15 years. I'm not going to go be an assistant. But I think the moment you do that and you have that attitude, you're already one behind all your competitors, because the moment you don't want to learn anymore, I think that's when you realise your ego's probably taken over.
Again, love that, but I think it's absolutely true, because even though Ryan Mason's got that managerial experience behind him, I don't think he's in that position to sort of step off and go as a full-time manager yet. I think he's building on that experience, and he is doing a very good job at Spurs. Even though they lost the other day, I think to fight back and come back and just lose 4-3 to a decent side, I think it shows the heart and willingness compared to the week before and what he's instilled. And it's showing that he's not rushing out too quickly, and there's still a lot for him to learn. And John Terry was exactly the same. He always said he wanted to be a manager, etc. And then was assistant at Villa, and then dropped back to Chelsea Academy. I know he's come back to be an assistant, but he sort of moved in a direction where it's like, I want to be a head coach, but then sort of down the line he's gone, do you know what, actually not yet, and has moved away from it. And the same can be said for Frank Lampard. He left Derby for me too quickly to go to the Chelsea job. Yes, he was ex-player. Yes, Premier League. Yes, good abundance of resources, etc. But what could he have done with Derby? And I think that just shows sometimes, even though a better opportunity might be there, realistically, it's not the better opportunity for you to learn, grow and develop, as you said then.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it happens a lot, doesn't it? There's a lot of people that might be an assistant coach for a long time. It happens in the States. So I played in the college system in America, and it happens where so many people spend years as an assistant. Sometimes you get paid minimal, sometimes you get paid nothing. You're there for the love of it, the passion of it. You have to have a full-time job, part-time job on the side. And then as soon as you do get to that head coach position, it's like, oh, why would I ever go back? But, the handful of people that actually recognise, well, actually, there's an opportunity for me to go to a top university, be an assistant and learn from some of the best, then stay at a really smaller school, which isn't in a mega competitive conference. It happens. And I think that's the best thing when you see coaches actually saying, do you know what? Doesn't matter if I've been a head coach, I can always learn.
And there's the same with my assistant manager now. So where I went back to the under-19s this year, he was happy for me to take over as that 19s manager, and he was happy to step and be the assistant. And even though he's had the squad from under-6s and he's fluctuated between assistant and lead on it, he was happy to sort of hand that over and go, well, I want to learn from you and I want to see what you're doing, and I want to take a step back and just enjoy actually coaching rather than the management side of it. And he's been the most amazing assistant manager because of his experiences and understanding the squad. But it was so humble in the way he said, I'm happy for you to just take the lead and crack on, whereas some others would be like, no chance, you're not coming anywhere near it. But I think it's, again, that personality where it's so important to find the right people who have the same energy as you. And I know without him this year, I wouldn't have enjoyed the experience as much. And even though it's difficult to manage and coach, I think it's made it even more enjoyable by having someone I can lean on and know who's there and supportive, and just someone to have a conversation with.
Yeah, absolutely. And it takes a lot for a person to be like that, come on in, take the lead, and kind of changing your perspective to like, well, actually, what can I learn? So from his position as an assistant, okay, I've been deemed as the head coach, but actually, what can I learn in this situation? I think it takes a big character to kind of recognise, take your ego out of it, take your personal goals and validation and what people might think of you being seen as the head coach, take that out of it and think, actually, what am I going to learn now? And I think that's the exciting thing when you see people do that. So I don't know if you've ever watched the series Ted Lasso. I think that's why I absolutely love it. It's got to be one of my favourite TV shows ever. And I just think it's excellent. And that kind of sums it up, really. You see the different characters in that, and some of them, and again, it's not based on a true story, but some of them fall to egos getting in the way.
And I think, it touches on a point there, because as much as we might have a really talented squad and we might have, the Galacticos, etc., we just need someone who might have that bit of personality who can make the squad laugh and bring them together. And he might not be the most technical player of them all, but they might come straight into the dressing room and add that extra element which we've been missing, and suddenly you've got that gel group which you were lacking before. And when it comes down to it, obviously as a captain you're in a very important position, but you're in a very precautious position as well, because you're on the side of the players, but then you might be on the side of the management team as well. Do you ever have those consultations with the manager where he or she might consult you and be like, oh, what do you think about this player coming in? Or do you think it's time to move this player on? Or do you think so-and-so's struggling and we should drop them? Have you ever been in that position?
Yeah, so we've got quite I'd say a unique setup. I think more clubs are starting to do it. So we have essentially, on the outside perspective, it's called like a leadership team. So it's actually myself as captain in our first team, and then our two vice captains that we have, Kirsten and Keris. We make up the leadership team. So we kind of hated the word leadership team because it just gets thrown around in so many organisations. So we actually use the example of us being called a huddle. So the three of us represent the huddle, and that is essentially in the first team, the three of us make up the huddle, and we're kind of that bridge between the coaching staff and the players. And again, it can be hard because you're trying to, you're kind of trying to not write the narrative, but you're trying to kind of push the narrative through from what the coaches want. But then vice versa, we need to be able to do that with players in the right way. So we're quite unique with what we do. There's a couple of clubs, I think championship level, women's team, and possibly WSL that do it. But it works it's not necessarily all on one person. I've been at clubs before where you have one captain, everything gets put on them. It's quite overwhelming. When you're at a grassroots level, okay, it's difficult. We're all volunteers. It's really hard. It's like a full-time job in itself. It's different if you're a professional team. I'd imagine in the WSL when you've got all the time in the world, I say all the time in the world, but aside from training, you're in and around the team and the squad every day. So you've got more chance to influence and have conversations. At grassroots level, it's extremely difficult because the players on our team are completely varied in age. We've got young players that are 16, 17 that are just finishing GCSEs, they were doing college. We've got some people who are nearly 30 who are in full-time jobs, lawyers, solicitors, we've got completely a bit of everything. So suddenly when you have one captain, they're quite isolated with, everything has to go through them. And that's not something we like doing at Worcester because it doesn't work for the captain, it doesn't work for the club, it's not fair on really anyone, and it doesn't help move the boat forward, like we say. So we have our little huddle, which is the three of us, and it's something that's still evolving. It's only really come into play for us at the start of the season last year, so around September time. So it's definitely something we're still trying to figure out. But yeah, we try to be that group that can help be there for the players as a three, because I think you mentioned earlier, you want to have different characters in the changing room. You want to have different personalities. You don't want the same kind of people because you're not going to be able to move forward. If you've got 10 people and they all agree the same things, you're going to get to a point in time where actually you're going to become unstuck. You need that one person to actually be like, nah, I don't agree with that. Or actually, we should try this. And I think that's why the huddle works, is we're all quite different as human beings. And I think you need three different people in there because some players will naturally gravitate towards me and my personality, but equally some might go to the other two, and that's absolutely fine. So that's kind of how we look at alleviating any kind of issues or problems at Worcester City at the moment, is through that huddle. But like I said, it is still evolving.
I really love that concept in terms of huddle, and again, that's something that I've been reflecting on in terms of the organisations that I work with and how people have this title as leader, but not essentially might be that. And it's just then a shame because they've been awarded it by default rather than actually being in that position or actually have the quality to be one in that sense. So I really love Huddle because it takes away that context of being a leadership, because as you might have a leadership, you might then drive that bridge between team and the leaders in that team then. But I really love that, and it takes away that context, and I think that context is really important because sometimes, they're the leader, or they're the captain, or I'm not going to go and approach them, I might speak to this player, or I can't go to them because they're in this position, and that's where the question came from, because you're on the side of the players, you're on the side of the management team, but then you don't want players going, I can't speak to Jess because she might report that back to the coach, and then vice versa. And but I think that's such an interesting concept in terms of that. And as that position, I was speaking to my friend earlier, and he's doing a media as part of his dissertation or overall degree, and he asked about exposure. Now, even though you're grassroots voluntary, and football is your life, and as you said earlier, you don't see yourself leaving. But do you think an opportunity, say, arised in WSL, you would jump on it?
Yeah, of course. I've still got a lot of learning, a lot of experience to do. I've had my time playing in the States, loved it, decided to then kind of go into coaching for a bit. I thought I'm still young enough to play. So decided when I did come back to the UK to play, then unfortunately got an ACL injury. So this has actually been my first full season back. So of course you wouldn't turn down an opportunity in the WSL. However, with that being said, there's no way I'd be ready for it as any kind of coach. It'd probably have to be more so relying on my S&C hat and my knowledge that side. But even then, I think it's weighing up what's the most important thing, because on paper it looked great. Obviously, I wouldn't be ready for it as a coach. There's a lot I need to do through badges and, additional CPD stuff. But also, I think it's equally important to be in a place you love. It's quite easy to put the WSL on a pedestal and have it as utopia because, of course, it's really the only professional league in the UK, which is great. But also, you want to have a good setup. You want to make sure the club is right and it is right for you, not just from the social media, not just from what people can see, of course, if you heard the word Arsenal, Chelsea, Man United, why would you not want to go work for those? But I think when you're at something you're really passionate about, like with Worcester City and what we've got going, we have this vision of we do want to get to the WSL. Of course, it's going to be a 15-year plan. It's, maybe not even then, maybe more, maybe less. But it's for me, the art of buying into something that's so much bigger than yourself, and it's putting somewhere very small on the map, but putting it as somewhere even bigger that people actually can recognise it for a football club and for people doing things through football as opposed to Worcestershire sauce, which is usually what happens. So yeah, of course, I wouldn't ever say no to the WSL. It'd be a fantastic opportunity, especially in the future as I develop as a coach and I maybe one day transition into a manager. But for me, I'd love it. Utopia. Looking forward, it's seeing Worcester City in the WSL Championship and being in and around that setup.
Which hopefully happens, and best of luck to you and everyone who's involved. And let's hope that it does happen, because that would be really exciting to see, the teams going up, etc., and how that would look in terms of, the growth of the club and whether personnel might change and whether the philosophy might develop or how the playing style. And that's what's really interesting when teams come up or down. And I was listening to Sam Allardyce earlier on his podcast, and he was saying when he was actually at West Ham, the chairman actually didn't want him to qualify for Champions League football because it was more of a financial decision that they were better off not pursuing a higher competition because it would have impacted them on terms of costing, contracts, etc. So it's quite an interesting ploy how that would turn out and whether it be, beneficial, detrimental, but overall it would have to happen for the best of the club at the time, for example, because then it's getting that more exposure, it's getting the opportunity of getting more players in and creating more history and all of that side. So when it comes down to exposure in terms of, the football data that's out there, you look at the male side of the things, you can get data right down to the lowest levels at, semi-pro. But at the women's, even at amateurs, but at the women's, there seems to be such a lack of data and that driven platform to have that available. And obviously the game's growing and that's where it can go. But when it comes down to individually and, you might have a player on your team who might be really motivated to go and play in the WSL, do you think exposure at your level is really important, or is it just naturally, putting yourself out about and seeing what happens?
Yeah, I think exposure is massive. I think the women's game's still growing, isn't it? And it's very difficult because, if you've got players at our team, at our level, and Emma Hayes comes knocking from Chelsea, you're not turning that down. If Arsenal come knocking, you wouldn't turn it down. I wouldn't as a player. You'd jump at that chance. But yeah, there's more exposures needed, which obviously we're starting to go that way, which is great. The data side, I think people have started to realise in the last 12, 18 months in particular, like, holy crap, we actually don't have that much data on any women's sports. I know when I've looked at, being at university, I've recently finished in this past January my a master's in S&C. So I finished that degree, and even then when I'm looking at stuff, I want to look at doing female football, when you want to look at data and you want to look at research out there, but actually it's very minimal. And if there is any, it's normally like 10 players and it's a WSL team, and obviously they can't disclose which team it is. But you're looking at the very minimum side, and then there's still not that much out there to compare it to. So there's still a long way to go for that. I know a lot of talk is around the ACL side, which again, there's a huge argument for that in itself. But I think data as a whole needs to start moving that way. With let's get more data. Let's start really looking at what do you need to be at the pro level, because there's a big gap at the moment. And I think one thing that is missing is we need people to come in and practitioners to come in and look at actually tiers 3, 4, and 5 in the pyramid and kind of get data from those, whether it's S&C data, whether it's GPS data, but come in at tiers 3, 4, and 5. So then players within those tiers and clubs within those tiers kind of know what it takes to then be like, right, okay, if we're comparing ourselves to the next league up, how far away are we? And I appreciate, data is that. It's data. It doesn't always tell the full story. You could have had someone with GPS, someone's run 10 miles, someone's run 5 miles as a centre mid. Doesn't necessarily mean the one that's run 10 miles has played the better game. Could be the one that's run 5 actually is played better, 2 assists, 2 goals, whatever it may be. But I think by having that data, it is more informative of where we are at the moment, because I know for our team, when we've looked at data in the past, we have, even the start of the season, we're comparing our metrics to WSL metrics. Well, we're never, ever going to be at that level. And some of our players won't because they're on the older side of it. You're never, ever going to be at those levels. So then for us, it's quite deflating for players because you're looking at it and thinking, I'm in tier 5. They're essentially tier 1, the top tier. I'm miles away. I'm never going to be at that. So then they're deflated because they're feeling they're not as good as they should be. But then again, that's a massive gap. And I think when you then break it down even further and you compare the WSL to the Championship, I still think there's a huge gap there. Not every team is professionalised at the moment. You can even see it with teams. And I think a lot of the issues between WSL and Championship, I don't say issues, but what I think the main thing is between the levels is actually recognising how to create solutions on the pitch. You look at the WSL and you can see that, yeah, you've got top managers and top players. But as a player on the pitch, they can kind of come up with solutions themselves. They can identify what are the main issues, what are we struggling with at this moment in time, and rectify it as players. Whereas I feel like from the Championship, it's kind of creeping in now where players are taking ownership, but they might need to look at the managers, they might need assistance from elsewhere. And I think as you go down the tiers, it gets even wider, in my opinion. You know, everyone's got different opinions on it. But I think especially in the tier we're in, it is quite easy to be like, right, okay, let's look at the manager. We're 2-0 down at half-time. What do we need to do? And I think if we can start looking at solving problems as players, we're certainly going to have a vast majority of players that are a lot better and could probably play higher tiers. But yeah, I think you're right on the data side. A lot more data needs to happen to bridge that gap.
Such an in-depth response there and so much to sort of consider. But I think, you know, you highlight some really key points and aspects for consideration and where the game should go and how it's going to go. And, you know, it's about creating those opportunities. As you say, deflating players is really difficult because it's how then you maintain those players. How does it affect, you know, team confidence, team motivation? Do we keep them as players? Is it easier to move them on, etc.? And it's that really interesting thing between trying to grow the women's game and increase participation, but then trying to increase and grow the standards and quality to try and pursue to the higher tiers. And it's a difficult sort of place to be in, but it's also a very exciting one in terms of being part of that and how that goes about. And what I really liked is that you say create solutions as a player and how you problem solve on the pitch. And sometimes, you know, we're not seeing enough of that. And we're not seeing enough initiative taken by players to go, all right, we could have done this, I could have done that. And there could have been a lot more seen there. And sometimes I've seen it from my assistant coach and, you know, very good assistant coach, but sometimes he's like, oh, that was the only option he had. I was like, well, no, not realistically, because that's the way you've always coached and that's been part of your sort of playing style. Realistically, if he was, you know, coached and educated and taught a bit more, then he would have seen, oh, I could have done this, we could have done that, then we could have switched play, and then we could have broke the line here, we could have got through on that side. And that's the real importance in terms of that game knowledge really evolving into game intelligence.
Absolutely. I think it's difficult because, again, is it an education thing? Is it like the knowledge of the individuals not knowing? Is it a little bit of experience versus age? Is it kind of different situations you're not used to? There's so many different kind of, I guess, factors as to how do players go and solve problems on the pitch. But I think in any sport, you look at any sport, and, you know, I go back to basketball because I've read a lot from Phil Jackson, but the way Michael Jordan talks about think power and how the better teams he's played in are all being able to kind of solve problems themselves and not look at the managers and not look at them and say, right, okay, what do we need to do? But yeah, I think it's partly, you know, understanding the players, because if you're young, you've probably not been in some situations before. So you're kind of looking at, you know, your mentors on the pitch, off the pitch, you're looking at, you know, how can I try and solve that situation? And again, it comes down to personality. A younger player personality versus another younger player, it might be completely different. One might think, oh, I might just try this. And one might think, oh my God, I better not do that because I'll get in trouble. So there's so many different factors to it. But I think, yeah, if you can get players solving problems on the pitch, you're going to make a lot better players. You're going to play better football and probably get more results that you want.
And it's great for you right now because as much as you're a player and in that position where you're still in the change room, you're still on the pitch and, as you say, learning yourself, you know, in the back of your mind, you might be, right, I want to be a head coach, I want to be a coach at one point, I want to get here. But you're taking your time because you might explore these options and still enjoy playing. But whilst you're doing that, you're also sort of building towards the future in terms of those experiences and how you might then approach that from a coaching or head coach style and how you might create that education for players, how you might support them. And it's that really interesting contrast of what you can then transfer between player and head coach and sort of build towards that long-term outcomes. And, you know, it's sort of preparing for the worst, but also preparing for the best and creating the best sort of situation from what you've experienced as well. And that's what's really exciting in terms of what you could bring as a head coach and really what you've learned from your experiences.
Yeah, I think I've been fortunate that I have had quite a bit of coaching experience even when I was younger. So when I stayed on in the States and decided to do that year of coaching, and like I said, the collegiate level it's like you're a professional athlete when you're playing. It's mad. And even as a coach, you're with the athletes every day. You learn so much. But then going back to playing, it is mad and crazy to think how different it is because players are selfish. Like any player that plays football is selfish because you just want to play. you don't necessarily see the bigger picture. You don't necessarily see, why is he pulling me off? Am I in the game of my life? Like, you just don't as a player, because as a player, you want to relish every single minute. You want to be on the pitch. You want to be scoring goals or saving the big shots in the big games. Like, I think that's what you want as a player, and because we all play the game because we love it. And most of the time it's because we're playing well, we're enjoying it, we're scoring, we're doing the things we do best as a player. But then as soon as you transition into that coach's mindset, completely different. And I think I've definitely flip-flopped between it. And I feel quite lucky. So if I do eventually go into that coaching role in the WSL, which would be great, I can draw on experiences from a bit of both. But yeah, when you're in the moment, it's definitely difficult to sometimes see the opposite side. So as a player, it's sometimes hard to see the coach, and vice versa as a coach, sometimes it's hard to see the player's thought process on things.
And when you're sort of in that position, then when you are on a pitch playing, do you find it hard to switch off your coaching hat at times?
Do you know what? I don't. The last 12 months, because I've been fully back into playing, I think I've been so focused on playing and my performance as an individual and what I can bring to the team. I probably haven't as much. Probably around 12, 18 months ago, as I was transitioning back from ACL, I was part-time player coach. Absolutely, you're kind of a bit of both. But I think the word coach, if you think about it, when you're a leader on the pitch, it's very similar. You are, as a captain, as a leader, you are trying to solve problems, just like you would as a coach on the side of the pitch. You are still trying to decide in the moment, how do I speak to this teammate of mine? How do I speak to the ref? Because everything you do is essentially everything you do, right? So I think you do have those moments where, as a coach and as a leader, a lot of it transpires, a lot of it's very similar, and that's very normal and okay.
And that's such a key point in terms of how that might transpire, and relates to what you say earlier on in terms of, bridging that connection, how things may be seen, that context. And I think it's really important to have those considerations. And, when it comes down to it, then it's great that you can still have that focus when you are a player, because I know when I was still playing / coaching, I was just absolutely losing interest in playing, because I thought, oh, that player should be there and we should be doing this and that. And then suddenly I was struggling with it in terms of myself. But it's good that you still can enjoy being a player, and even though you might want to be a coach long term, that's sort of simmering in the background, and it's not sort of taking over and preventing you from playing or preventing you from enjoying playing. And that's great, because you are essentially putting yourself first and enjoying where you are right now and thinking, oh, that could happen in the future. But I think as much as we plan for the long term, it's also about enjoying here and now and not missing it.
Absolutely. And I think I nearly made that mistake. I don't regret anything. I don't think you should. I think we do things in life. We pick the reasons and the paths we go down for a reason in that moment of time. And I think I did have the opportunity after finishing my 4 years in America to carry on playing in Europe, but decided to stay and coach. And I think there was a reason I did that. And I got to experience a little bit of both. And then coming back to playing, I'm like, do you know what? Short term, you can't play forever. You really can't. And I know I can be in the future. I can learn so much in these next 5-10 years of me playing. I can probably utilise loads of those experiences to then help other players that might be in similar situations. And I can do that as a coach, a manager, head coach, whatever it may be. So yeah, absolutely. I've had that decision where I was like, right, no, that's it. I'm done playing. I'm burnt out. I'm going to be a coach, because that's long-term goal. But then actually bringing it back to it, it's, you can't play football forever. So, everyone is different. Like you said, you enjoyed the coaching aspect. Everyone is different. For me, my advice to anyone is play while you can, because you're not going to be able to play forever.
And is that what led to you coming back from the US to the UK then?
Yeah, so unfortunately my visa ended. So I did my 4 years of playing and studying, had my year extended to coach. So coached at the uni I was at, which is amazing. My visa came to an end and then came back. And then it was very difficult actually transitioning. You don't really get much support when you finish, because like I said, at college level, as mad as it sounds, you are training and playing every day. You're playing in season 2-3 games in the space of like 7 days. Like, your schedule is just really full on. But no one really gives you that support to go from being a full-time athlete, essentially, while studying for a degree, so being a full-time student, you're doing both at the same time, while travelling to games, whether you're flying to different places in America, you're on a coach, whatever it may be, all the other things you do outside, and then even trying to fit in a social life. I really struggle with the transition of doing that, because then essentially you come to, right, you finish your degree, you haven't got to study anymore, go find a job, and yeah, it's up to you whether you play or not. And there's a lot of people in America, a lot of friends I've had, a lot of teammates who are unbelievable players, but they just never continue playing, because for them they don't really have the infrastructure at club. It's either you try and make it as a professional in the States, which is amazing. As a female, the standard is ridiculously high. So obviously not everyone's going to be able to do that. But then it's that transition of, well, hang on a second, what do I suddenly do? I've been go. I've put, 5 a.m. workouts in, everything you do as an athlete. as well as studying, and then all of a sudden it just comes to a stop. So I actually struggled with that transition, if I'm honest, because I think it's really difficult to go from doing all of that to stopping. But then when I did that year of coaching, absolutely loved it, came back to the UK, and then comparing it then to going back to grassroots level, and even like in not just infrastructure, but like the money and the funding that's in it, ridiculous of what you get in the States. Like I said, not only are you training every day, but you've got the best kit, the best equipment, you get coaches, you get physios, you get S&C, you get ice baths, protein shakes, everything you need that a pro gets in this country, you get as a collegiate athlete in the States. So then to come back and then go back to grassroots level, and at the time when I first came back, this was a good few years ago now, you can tell I'm getting on, but when I first came back, you know, the local teams had mixed match kit, didn't necessarily have loads of players. You might have played with 9 or 10 players because people have been busy and have got plans, struggling to get referees, and you think, God, it's bonkers just how different it is. So yeah, that's one thing I definitely struggled with, was that transition. And it probably made me fall out of love with football because my expectations were so high from being in the States. Obviously having the best experience, the best time, learning loads. But my expectations are set very high to then come back to, right, this is what it's like at grassroots level. But the fact that the Euros happened last year was like the perfect timing. I think looking back on that Euros, we had to win it. Like, being totally honest with where women's football's at, we had to win it to kind of progress it forward. And I hope to think now that we've won the Euros and more people are recognising it and there's more funding and, more exposure, you'd like to think now that in the grassroots level, there's going to be a lot more, not just funding, but like getting the right people in at teams, doing things the right way, getting the right kit in, the right sponsorship in, and then hopefully, we might be able to mimic something similar to the infrastructure of in the States.
And there's so many interesting points there, and it's it's that concept which it's either play or don't bother at all, and that's quite interesting because a couple of the pros that I've spoken to have gone abroad from America. They've said they've had some really good friends who are played over there and such high quality, but they've actually been easier to give up playing football because the money isn't there, or they're actually going to earn more as a lawyer or a doctor, for example, and that's such a shame because they're literally giving up what so many people have pursued and trying to get to, and they've got there and have gone, I'm going to give up now because of this, and it really shouldn't be in that position where they have to go, I'm going to give up where I've worked so hard to be. And when you say about that fantastic program, there is so much quality, and when you see just on Twitter, they got the showcase weekends and the players are constantly pushing themselves in exposure. There's constantly talent ID camps, there's coaches looking for them, there's amazing colleges, there's the facilities. It's absolutely madness how big it is, and I think that's what we're missing here in the UK in terms of our college program of both male and female. But then they're missing, as you said, that professional level above it. But it's so interesting that you've gone through it, and it was like, all right, carry on now yourself, and they just sort of cut you loose, and it's that make or breaking sort of sport. But then it's hard for you then because, as you said, you sort of fell out of love of football because of the expectations. But it's good that you're back at a level where you are enjoying it again.
Yeah, and I think it's like credit to the people around you. It's the club you're at. Like I said, who knows if 2-3 years ago, if Nicole Allison hadn't come in and taken over the club and doing what she's doing, I might not even be here, and I might be coaching somewhere. I might not even be playing. So I am a firm believer in everything happens for a reason, definitely. So I feel like what I had to go through as that player, transitioning to a coach for a bit to then come back and play, I'm supposed to be where I'm supposed to be at this moment in time, if that makes sense.
Of course, and that's I'm a big believer in terms of things happen in life, and the way that it sort of works out is meant to be, and it's great that you are back and that you're in a position where you feel that it's all happened for you, and it's a good future that you've got ahead of you, both playing and coaching, and hopefully you reach the higher levels, but hopefully you still enjoy doing what you're doing now at the same time as well. And it's about educating the players, which you're doing as a captain, and it's that dynamic future which is really important. And I think that they're so lucky to have you on their team, and so lucky to have you as captain as well.
I appreciate that. I mean, I disagree. I mean, that we've got a great setup. We've got fantastic people there. So, they make the job. I say it's a job. Obviously, it's not a job, but they make it a lot easier because if you don't love what you're doing, you don't stick around. And I think because everyone seems to started to gel, especially the last 12 months, we've had new coaching staff, new players in. It is really transition season for us. We've probably punched way above our weight in terms of where we were this time last year. And people are starting to be like, oh, okay, Worcester City, they're decent. They've got a good setup. And that's how we want it to be. We want it to be all about the long term, the bigger picture, not short term, which is quite easy to get caught up in. So yeah, look, I'm probably the lucky one. I've got some amazing people around me. We've got a great setup, and it makes it worthwhile.
And I love that you say punching above your weight, because obviously a part of that then shows how much energy has been brought by people, the good setup, the support that's going on and off the pitch, the players and what you're doing. And when it comes down to then a playing style and philosophy in that sense, do you think that the belief and the tightness of a team overrides the quality in terms of a philosophy, or do you think it has to balance out both to push to those high levels?
Do you know what? I'm not sure. I think about this quite often, actually, because for me, you need the talent, right, when you're at those top levels. But then when all things are equal, the difference between winning and losing is often just the simple things of working hard. And one of the things our managers and coaches at Worcester City at the moment always talk about is earning the right to play. And we earn the right to play not by scoring a screamer, not by winning 10-0. Earning the right to play could be someone puts in a last-ditch challenge. It could be someone who's sprinting after a ball that's probably going to go out, but are they going to get there in time? And it's doing the little bits that no one really wants to do, and they often kind of get missed. When you look back on games and you look at highlights, it's winning that first ball, winning that second ball. It's doing the dirty little things. I say dirty, I don't mean necessarily going through players and doing dirty tackles, but winning the first balls in the air, winning the second balls, and priding yourself on by doing all those little things, you are earning the right to play. So I don't know, I think about it quite a bit, and I think I'm starting to come around to the perspective, and I think my philosophy moving forward is, yes, of course you need talent, you do, but when all things are equal, you look at, again, as cheesy as it is, the Ted Lasso thing, again, it's not real, but in real life scenarios, you look at Leicester City, in no right way or means should they have won the league when they did, but you look at, there was a reason why it happened, right, and I always say that Leicester City at the time, they went from being nearly relegated the season before to winning the Premier League. It doesn't just suddenly happen because you bring in one or two fantastic players. Of course, they had talented players within the squad, but so did at the time Arsenal, Man United, Man City, Chelsea, Liverpool, all these top clubs did as well. So all things equal, what was the difference? Well, the manager's got them playing. The players seem to trust each other on a completely different level. And it's all those little things you don't really see. So from my perspective, I know a lot of people in general, even outside of sport and football, say, don't sweat the small details. But for me, I think it's the small details you should sweat, because they're the ones that actually are showing you that all these little small details you're doing are adding up. If you're going to do the little things on the pitch, like for us, win the first balls, win the second balls, from an outsider's perspective, they might not be like, they didn't score a screamer today. But from our perspective, we might have managed to grind out a 1-0 win, whereas last season, 2 seasons ago, we might not have. So I am a firm believer, and actually, I think you should sweat the small things, because I think they're the most important things. Because I'll go back to what I think I mentioned earlier, is I truly believe that anything you do is everything you do. So all those small little things, if you're going to cut the corners on those, then you're going to cut corners on bigger things when the time gets, to situations where you might need to be in a position to do your best. You might be in a cup final. I think if you cut those small details, they'll then show when you get to that cup final.
3 great quotes there that I'm trying to quickly note down as you're saying them.
Sorry.
But I'm already thinking, right, how can I take this into my change room next year and put this on the wall? And I think it's absolutely key, because, as you say there, be first to the ball, or the little details, or how can we do this first before them? It might make that absolute difference. And we're sort of seeing that with Wrexham right now. And as much as, they got billionaire owners and this, that, and the other, and they can throw money. But they brought quality in, but it's this belief that they brought in, it's the infrastructure, it's the standards that they've driven, and it's got the city behind them. And when you look at the data and how much they've, multiplied, season ticket holders, the followers on Instagram, etc., it just shows that the more following you get, the more belief and the better the vibe factor, and that's what's pushed them up. It's not just the quality. I think it's all those factors that are combined, and it's going to be interesting next season to see how well they do in the Championship and whether they're up around the playoffs. But I think if they have that self-belief, that they will be up around there. And I think it's such an interesting journey that they're going to be on. And it's so many key points which you said of how you amalgamate that together into one, and whether it's that balance between what you're doing on the pitch or whether it's off the pitch, and how you're doing it, how you're approaching things, and it's how you bring it and bridge it all together.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's the key thing, is, like you said, bridging it together. For me, I'm a firm believer in, everything does happen for a reason. So I do think, in terms of Worcester City, I do think whether I'm involved or not involved, I do think it's going to go the places it deserves to go. But in terms of philosophy, I really do believe that, going back to those basics and working hard, like the Leicester did, like they proved in a real life situation, that with all things equal, you can achieve anything, which again, it's madness when you look at all the players at that level, how good they were, compared to some of the teams like Tottenham were that season. You think it was bonkers that they even won the league, but it just goes to show that when you do have that tight-knit group, actually, do you need to have a manager that knows football inside out, or actually can you have someone that just knows people? And I always bang on about Ted Lasso because I think I'd love to see a real-life version of it. Not to say it's going to work. It might be completely orphan and implode and be horrendous, but I think that's when it's important in the coaching staff to have someone that can see bigger picture. Yes, you need people that understand football. Of course, you're not going to get anywhere for people that, if you can't have a coaching staff that can't be technical and tactical. Thankfully, at Worcester City, we've got unbelievable people that are good at that. But then I also think you need those people that are emotionally intelligent, that can actually say, hang on a second, this is more than football. Forget about that. They might not have made that run back. This is out of their normal personality or behaviour traits they're showing. And it's that person saying, right, let's chat to them. There's obviously something going on. And I think you need to make sure you have that vast, dynamic kind of coaching staff to be able to make that work.
And that's such an interesting concept there in terms of, you might not need the most technical manager right at the top at the helm leading things, but he or she might have that delegation where I'm happy for the coach to go on and do this, or for them to take training sessions, and they might be the people leader and they might be the ones who are putting things in place. And sometimes that's what you need, and it's not everything comes down to the head coach or manager. And you might take away and not have the most technical person, but you've got the right person because you've got the right personnel, as you said, around them. And it's exciting in terms of what Worcester are doing, and it's great that we can see people to be and hold them accountable in terms of, parents in the back of my mind. Parents going, all right, the coach must be tactical, the coach must win games, the coach must do this. But realistically, if they're amalgamating a team and the coach is making, the kids happy and they're helping them on a journey and the kids are loving it and they've got opportunities in the future, then realistically, this coach is doing more in the long run than going, oh, we've won 10 games, we won the cup this year. Well, no, well, is your child still going to be in the game at 16, or are they still going to be playing at 23, 24 and enjoying it regardless of whether they won the cup or not?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it comes down to that word sustainability, and that's definitely something at Worcester. It's like one of the values and goals we have is being sustainable. There are so many teams in the women's game, and it's such a shame. There's so many teams that they have the raw talent, they have good things going for them, and then they get promoted, and then actually, if anything, the next few seasons they get relegated again because they're just not ready for it. Because it's all about that long term. And in football, it's so easy to get caught up in the short term solutions. So let's get this player in now. Let's say we'll pay for their expenses. All sounds great, but in the long term, if you can't gel that team and you can't get a connection going, and I think the point you said with the kids in particular, one of my bugbearers is when you've got, under 11s, under 12s, under 10s, whatever it may be, at that age, they're not there to be the absolute best player. Because if they are at grassroots level, they're probably going to be in an academy, or you probably should help and move them on. But at that age, at a grassroots level, you just want them enjoying it. It's not about, you've won 20 games this season out of 21 and you won the cup. Yeah, it's great. They might look back on it. But if only 5 of those continue playing, is it really worth it? Is it successful? Is it sustainable for them and that club? Obviously not. So I definitely have a bugbear around the younger age and the younger generation of teach them the basics, but it's about connection, it's about believing in them, it's about showing them what the sport can do. And of course you want them to be good, you want them to improve, that's why you're there as a coach, to help them. But it's so much more than that particular season and winning something tangible, I guess.
And I think that's such an important point. And I'm just thinking of a young player in the back of my mind, as you say, when it comes to young players and enjoying that process. And I know a parent and a player this year, and they were originally released by a development centre because they didn't get any academy, and they got rid of the DC. So then he went on and trialled another academy, and they said no. So then he paid to go in a coaching centre, which is great. But then he only lasted a few months, and now he's at an elite centre, and he's paying to play there. And I'm like, well, he's jumped around 4 or 5 different clubs already this year, just in 1 year alone. I was like, he's under 11s / under 12s coming up. I said, how sustainable is that you've sort of explored all these options within 1 year when you could have had that over a 2, 3, 4 year period, but you're trying to push him into the academy, but realistically, he could be at grassroots, he could be enjoying it, could be making the memories, and there's no real rush for it. Under 14s, 15s, if you feel like you're panicking, I might have understood a little bit more, but I was like, he is still like 10, 11 years of age. He could have 4, 5, 6 years where that opportunity might come up because he's been seen playing for the grassroots, and they could have been in that other coaching centre and combining it and then going, all right, next year we might trial for the elite and see where it goes. But it's trying to push them too much. And then I think of another player. I just reconnected with their parent on socials, and he's like, oh, he's playing 7 days a week, he's playing for 4 different clubs, isn't that good? And I was like, no, he is 9 years old, and you got him playing for 4 different clubs 7 days a week. How quickly will that burnout happen?
Yeah, of course. And it's different if they enjoy it and they love it, great. But then if it's pushing them to try and be a pro, it's difficult, isn't it? It is really difficult. And I think there's a lot of discussion in particular at the moment. I think Trent Alexander-Arnold's come out about saying there's no support for people in the academy, which again, not that I've been in an academy environment and I know how it works, but you see and you hear a lot of things, you read about a lot of things. And I think actually a lot of it could probably have been targeted when they're younger, as opposed to putting these expectations out there. I completely understand having standards. I agree, you have to have the best players, you have to be hardworking, you have to be technical, you have to have all these 4 corners, I guess, if you're following the FA model. And I get it as a player, and you will have standards for them to be able to progress on to be a pro. Totally get that. But I think at the younger age group, it's kind of giving them that education. If you're going to have coaches at grassroots level that are all about win, 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 of course you're then going to be generating these next players who are expecting to win and expecting to be the best player and expecting to be a big fish in a little pond, expecting to get into academies. And then when it doesn't work out, they're not used to it. It's completely foreign to them. And it's hard, isn't it? Grassroots is hard because it's full of lots of volunteers. So it's amazing that these people, they go out their way, they do it. It's, brilliant. But I think we really need to start lower down the chain of how can we then educate the coaches, the parents, the people within that to best out the players at the end of the day.
Absolutely, and it's about that educational pathway and how that context comes across, and that's so important to really consider and have out there. And especially from a younger age, can we intervene and perhaps have those interventions? And I can certainly echo what Trent Alexander-Arnold is on about, because I've been in the academy system for 5.5 years. I've stopped coaching for about a year and a half ago, but I know a few players who are still in the sort of shadow squad just under the academy, and one player has been there 6, 7, 8 years. Been at every session, every game, parents taking them regardless of whether they're ill, etc. They've always paid their money, they've always got the kit, they've bought into it, they've been at every event, and then suddenly they've been cut off this year, just told, right, that's it, end of. 3 weeks later, then that was the end of the programme, and this player had been there 7 or 8 years, and there's been no follow-up, there's been no opportunity to go in the academy. They've had one sort of session, and they had a bit of a game the next week, but there was no sort of, right, you've got 3 weeks left, you've got 3 solid sessions with the academy, we might see these players progress. And then they were scouting at the same time for players of that age group outside, and when I suggested that this one player was the best player in that category and has been for years, they weren't interested because they wanted to look out the scope of what they already had. I was like, well, you just overlooked all your quality there, and it's such a tough one. And I think it's hard to be in that academy system. And when you said you weren't in that academy system then, looking back on it, is that sort of a good thing for you, or is it something that you sort of wish that you would experience at some point?
Do you know what? I think I was just part of the era of, again, I'm sounding old here, but there wasn't really those opportunities then. So what girls have now is incredible. So for me, when I was younger, if I wanted to play football, I played in the boys' team. I played it up until, I think it was 12 years of age at the time. I played with a boys' team the whole time. So for me, I thought that was great. It definitely helped my development. And I definitely recommend for those that want to play. And it's hard because you don't know at 7 years old, most people say, I want to be a professional footballer. The odds of it happening are quite slim. But for my development, that definitely made me the player I was, playing with boys and really pushing myself. But it's only because that's all I had open to me. There was no other option. We had no girls' teams. Then it wasn't until I got to, I think it was under 14s, we had the first girls' team I was part of. And, for me, it was great. It was different. I was just playing football. I didn't really think of it as a girls' team versus being in a boys' team, because it was just still, I'm kicking the ball around, nice people, everyone's here for the same reason. And then at the time, they had Centre of Excellences, but again, being in Worcester, you don't have much unless you're kind of hitting the Blues and Villa at the time. There isn't really much around. And when you're that age and you haven't got too much support, and if you're struggling in terms of whatever your family background may be, there wasn't really those opportunities. And even for me, that's the reason I made the decision to go to America was, am I going to be able to play at the top level in this country? At the time, probably not. I never really backed myself as a player. But then I was like, right, there's an opportunity for me to go to America. If I'm going to stay in this country and go to university and put myself through education, why not go and play over the pond? You see it on Bend It Like Beckham, as cheesy as it is, but you see the opportunities they have. And that's kind of why I decided to go down that route, because there wasn't really much for me. And you look at it now, it's amazing. It's going in the right way. There's young girls I'm coaching that's 6, 7 years old now, and I think you've got the world at your feet. There's going to be lots of opportunities open. But for me at the time, it was kind of, I just fell into what was there at that time.
And it's great that you've sort of come out where you are now, and you're looking back on it in terms of fondness. But I think what you amplify, and your expectations might be very different to how I might perceive them. And you might be going, oh, I'm not a WSL player, so therefore I failed. That's not where I want to be. But as you said, you are happy. But therefore, for me, you amplify successful because you've had 2 scholarships, one abroad, you've been away, you've experienced, you've come back, you've done a bit of coaching. You play at a very good standard of football, and there's opportunity to progress. You're a captain. You've met different people. You've had different experiences. You've got the opportunities in the future, whether to coach, continue playing. You've overcome injury. You've come back from it. And you've never been in the academy system. For me, success in one picture.
Yeah, do you know, you don't often stop and reflect on yourself, do you? You reflect as a coach of how can I be better, and I'm at the moment being a player and wearing the player hat. Of course, I'm always reflecting and always thinking, how could I have been better in this situation? What can I do next time for my teammate? What should I do next time in a game? And I do have ridiculously high standards that are impossible for anyone to reach. So I definitely need to learn to lower them. But you don't often reflect on where you've been. And it's, I think Nicole, who owns the club, actually is the CEO at Worcester, she's the one that said to me recently, this time last year, like, you had an ACL, you'd only just come back. And I was like, well, that's mad. Like, you forget because it feels like it was so long ago. And then you sit and think, actually, yeah, do you know what, 12 months ago I was only just returning, let alone playing lots of minutes and trying to contribute and do well. So it's quite nice to hear it, but you don't often reflect on what you've achieved so far and how you've got to where you are.
Well, I'm glad that it's made you smile and made you reflect there, because they are very proud accomplishments to have, and it's great that you're in a really good place and that you are doing very well, and I wish you the best success in the future to come, both individually and professionally in terms of what you're doing. And I know it's late, 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night, and you've got a busy week and you've had a busy day, and I don't want to extend into your night too much, so I'm just going to throw some quick fire questions at you before you go. So if you had to have someone describe you in 3 words, what would they be?
3 words. Definitely competitive. You're far too competitive. Hardworking and passionate.
Love them. You might have already answered this, but it could be different. If you could move to any country and coach or work or play, what country would it be and why?
If I hadn't been to America, I'd probably have said America. It's hard. So if I'm saying playing, I'm going to stay definitely with the way football's going. I'd stay in the UK and I'd play WSL, Arsenal, Chelsea, Man United. Again, as a coach, probably the same.
Love it. If you could be a professional in any other sport, what sport would it be?
I feel like basketball, just because I really bought into. I like watching it since being in the States. If not tennis, I feel like being a tennis player would be quite cool.
Cool. If you could spend a day with any coach or manager, who would it be and why?
Oh, just pick one. It's too hard, that is. It's too
hard.
All
right, well, if we said one female, one male?
One male, Sir Alex Ferguson, without a shadow of a doubt. One female, I don't know how to pick between Emma Hayes and Serena Wiegmann. That's too hard to pick, but one of those.
Tough choice. I watched the Chelsea documentary, and you don't realise how ruthless Emma Hayes is.
I love her. I think she's the GOAT. What she's done, that club and what she's won, unbelievable. I'd love to have any contact time with her because I think you'd learn loads. And
I was thinking about that the other day. As much as Chelsea males are in a bit of disarray right now, I think if I was Ted Bowley, I wouldn't even worry about the women's section. I'd just let them crack on. As long as they're not getting relegated or losing money, I'd just be like, yeah, carry on, and whatever you need, just come and see me, because they're doing so well.
So well, yeah, I think it'd be hard because I think the way Emma Hayes works and Serena works very different, but I think it'd be cool to see both approaches.
Good. Do you have any superstitions as a footballer?
No, I don't, but I think I'm a very routine person in general, so I like to stick to my routine. I don't like it when my routine's out.
Okay. If you could go and play for any club in the world, what club would it be?
Man United.
Oh, bad choice. And I was liking you until that point. Who was or is your role model?
Do you know what? As a young player playing football, sounds mad, David Beckham. I wanted to be David Beckham all day long, being a Man United fan. Loved him. He was the reason I wanted to be number 7 and play and have a good right foot and a terrible left foot.
On the day of his birthday as well, so that's a good answer.
Yeah, very fitting, yeah.
So to be a full-time professional footballer or a full-time professional coach at the highest level?
Player all day.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Interesting. If you're a coach now and you've got the choice of any job out there, so it could be the England national team, it could be Chelsea, Arsenal, City, United, who would you pick and why?
It's too hard because there's too many good managers at the clubs I'd want to be, so it'd have to be a long time in the future. But I think it's hard. I'm a Man United fan. I'd love to be part of the Man United setup, but then, you look at what Arsenal have achieved in the past and Chelsea. It's hard. It's not really quick fire, this one. Sorry, probably England. Look, let's be honest. Your national team, it's got to be England, hasn't it?
It's a good choice as well, especially exciting times for them and what's coming through. And if you had to pick the one thing you enjoy most about playing, what is it?
Winning. Winning.
Can't fault it, and I think that just sums up your expectations and your standards right there at the end.
Yeah, I think so. Like I said, I've got far too high standards, but yeah, I think I love winning, whatever it takes to win. Obviously, without cheating and being disrespectful, because above all, should be a good human being. But I think, yeah, winning, absolutely.
And if we clip this bit here and we do it for your exposure, you never know what contracts might be offered you in the future.
I don't know about that. I'm too old now, far too old.
Well, definitely not. I can't see it, and I don't see it reflecting in you. So I think you've got a great future ahead. And, I'm so grateful that, you were willing to come on, and then the arrangement last week, and you came on tonight, especially later on in the evening. But I really appreciate it. And I've loved the last hour, and I am very grateful that you came on.
Yeah, thank you. It's nice to be connected and appreciate coming on the pod. Really do.
Pleasure. Well, thank you very much, and I'll drop you a message in a bit, but it's a thank you again from me.
Brilliant. Thank you. Good to be connected with you, Luca. We'll touch base soon.
Absolutely. And you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.